David Goodstein, and I am a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with the Delft Group. I'll be working in the background to answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box. We encourage you at any time during today's presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the Submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 2 days. This email will include a link with today's recorded webinar and presentation slides. The webinar recording and presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. I'd like to tell you about today's speakers. We have Breanna Garratt. She is the CEO of the Delft Group. And we also have Nick Alexander. He is a senior associate at the Delft Group. Before we turn it over to them, I'd like to quickly say a few words about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and network opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourced buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you who are in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Breanna Garratt to begin the poll question and begin the presentation.
Terrific. Thank you, David. And good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's a pleasure to speak to everybody today. We're going to start the conversation with a quick poll. And this is relevant to our business based on the context in which your company operates. So if you could please select one answer here from the question of, do you offer a truly unique product or service to the market? Do you compete with companies that have similar offerings? And three answers are, we have a unique offering or a specialized expertise. We compete with a few pure plays and larger firms, or we compete with many similar firms. The reason why this is important for us is it helps us understand the landscape in which your company is trying to leverage your brand. And obviously, there are different strategies for companies that have a very unique offering or specialized expertise. In situations where the competition is a little bit more varied, you could have head-to-head competition with, if you're what they call a pure play, a very focused organization on one particular area of outsourcing or technology, you may just have a discrete offering, but at the same time you compete with larger firms that offer one piece of their solution set is something that you do, and so that requires some different thinking about brand. And then more often than not, we work with a lot of companies that compete with many similar firms. So the challenge to become more unique and position yourself in the marketplace in a way that is truly differentiating is a bit more challenging. So I can see that we have some answers. Terrific. So it looks like we've got a nice group, and it makes sense to us. So we see companies in all three categories here, but having a unique offering or specialized expertise is terrific, and it can make the job a little easier. And also, you know, as I said before, a little bit more challenging is when you have to compete with a lot of other companies that offer similar products and services. So that's a helpful context for us to begin our conversation today. And if we can go to the next slide. So brand and sales, and how do you leverage your brand to become a sales accelerator? And we think about this, part of our experience for the last decade or so has been working with companies in the outsourcing space. And we see the world through not only a service provider's lens, but also a buyer's lens. And as you probably all know, it's increasingly difficult to stand out. You know, things that were once key differentiators are kind of now Me Too's in the world. And, you know, oftentimes we hear things like, a sourcing advisor who's helping to vet this opportunity can't really help us differentiate our business from the people that we're competing against. So that's a challenge. And there's oftentimes, there's brand awareness issues where people don't even know who you are. And then there's the, we do this and so do we, and, like I said, many companies that offer the same set of products and services. And then there's always the unfortunate situation where you hear about a deal after the deal has been awarded, and you're, dismayed that you weren't even considered, and why didn't we get that deal? It was perfect for us. And lastly, that age-old bugaboo of cost. So, if you get a lot of similar firms, it's hard for a buyer to differentiate. It starts to become an increasing cost play, and that's obviously very challenging for service providers. Next slide, please. So what are buyers looking for? And they are challenged too with trying to find an efficient way to select the providers that are a good fit for their particular opportunity and their particular needs. So is it somebody with global capabilities? Is it a full service solution or a pure play provider? Are they looking for specific expertise? Are they going to be more comfortable with a large or a smaller sized organization? We're hearing a lot about customized versus standard solutions, and a best-in-class provider versus a comprehensive provider. I mean, all these questions are out there, which make it increasingly more challenging for both buyers and providers. Next slide. So let's take the other lens here is that through the outsourcing buyer's perspective. Hyper-competition and too many choices. There's quality choices. There's, the outsourcing industry is more crowded with buyers, and they're continually challenged to try to figure out what makes one provider different from the other. Oftentimes, I've not heard of this provider. Are they going to be comfortable working with you, even though, there's kind of that old adage of it's, you'll never get fired for working with one of the big guys. But that might not be the best solution for this organization. And, everybody looks the same, so let's just ask them to match pricing. And so then you get into that kind of downward spiral that nobody likes. Products and services are the same, and even procurement. Obviously the procurement role is a really important gatekeeper in this process. So if they can't distinguish between the providers, that makes the whole downstream process even more challenging. So that's kind of setting the context for this. And if you could go to the next slide, David. And simply put, who's defining what your company stands for? And if you don't do it, more than likely your competitors and prospects will do it for you. And chances are they're not going to get it right. So, and that's where this, our focus on brand, on sales, and on marketing, and in general, the overarching communications of an organization is increasingly very, very critical. So with that as kind of a backdrop, we have one more poll question that we wanted to ask. So, and this is always an interesting, take a look at your own organization. And if you ask your executive leaders, your sales force, and your marketing team to explain your value proposition, would they say the same thing? And kind of broadly speaking, if the organization is all on the same page and everybody would say the same thing, then you get an absolute gold star. Some organizations have some consistency, and that consistency might be, the sales folks say it the same way, but that's different than the communications that the marketing team is putting into the marketplace, so there's still some disconnects there. And, more likely in things that we see in terms of folks that come to us is everybody says something different. And it doesn't mean we all need to be robotic automatons in this scenario. It just means that there should be a core set of messages that people have as their toolkit so that when they are asked what the organization does and the value that it provides, that you have the opportunity to say something that's consistent with the other sales folks, with your executive leaders, with materials that the company's producing. So that's that's very important for standing out in this type of marketplace. Do we have? Oh, terrific. So we've got half of the group that says everybody would be on the same page, and then there's the other half that everybody would say something different. So that's really helpful context for us. And as we continue to move forward here, hopefully that both folks in these categories will benefit from our conversation. Thank you, David. Okay, so what we'd like to discuss today is our tagline, if you will, is brand development is business development. And the stronger the brand is, the stronger the business is, and it works harder for you in the marketplace. One of the mantras that we try to preach with all of our clients is consistency is vital throughout all your communications, be they written or verbal. Again, this doesn't mean we have to be robotic about it, but it means that we're bringing up the same key topics that start to get into the marketplace and you become known for. And hopefully they're truly unique and the only things that you can own. We're also going to talk a little bit about brand awareness and storytelling and how critical these are to sales success. And we have an easy-to-use tool that can help with all of the above here. And we're going to go through what we call sales battle cards. And that hopefully is going to be a good takeaway for everybody, be it everybody being on the same page and others that need some help in terms of making sure that everybody is on the same page. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is a great ad. This is probably from the late 50s, early 60s. It's a famous ad that shows a skeptical business person, and the copy's kind of small to read, but basically he says, I don't know who you are. I don't know your company. I don't know your company's product. I don't know what the company stands for. I don't know your company's customers. I don't know your company's record or your reputation. Now, what is it that you're here to sell me? So, that long way of, saying it is sales starts before your salesman calls. And brand can play a critical role in teeing up who you are, what you do, what value people can expect from your organization before you ever walk in the room or are invited to the deal. So, this is kind of a, and it's obviously been a core challenge forever. I mean, this was an ad in the, in the 60s. So it is a long-standing challenge for organizations. And to that end, if you can go to the next slide, please, David. So, you will hear us consistently hammer consistency. So it really helps, and helps your brand to become a sales accelerator. And successful brands are built by, again, identifying unique brand attributes, developing a differentiated market positioning and messaging, and then being very consistent across all mediums. And, that starts in the sales, web, email channels, social media, PR, any place that you're putting your organization out in the world, if you can keep it consistent, it can be much, much more powerful. And we've seen, we've had a lot of hair-raising stories over the years in terms of clients that we've worked with, companies that, they espouse to be consistent, but when their sales execs go to conferences and 2 or 3 sales execs are making presentations, their messaging is different. Even their PowerPoint, their look and feel of their tool is different. He did it on the airplane on the way there, and so it's full of clip art, and it doesn't reflect the organization's strategy and its positioning in the marketplace. So there are many pitfalls in this, and a lot of it is understandable. And if you don't take the reins in terms of defining what your brand and your company stands for, then oftentimes you'll have to spend those first 15 minutes in a meeting unwinding the marketplace and winding them back up in terms of what you want them to know about your business and the value they can expect from working with you. So getting that right accelerates the sales cycle. It makes it easier for people to turn around, and if they attended a meeting that you were at, for them to more simply, tell the same story and be able to say, hey, we should work with this company because, they can provide X, Y, Z, or they told us an interesting story about how they helped solve a problem. That's the exact same problem that we have. And so this whole concept of consistency in messages in storytelling is really important. And I know that seems like such a simple attribute to have inside an organization, but you'd be amazed at how challenging that can be. And to that end, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Nick Alexander, to take us through the next series of slides, as he is a terrific storyteller, and we'll share a few more with you in terms of this lovely gentleman here who's very famous for being a storyteller. Nick?
Thank you, Breanna. Yes, this gentleman is very, very famous for being a storyteller. But first, let's talk a little bit more about why stories are important. When it comes down to it, people buy from people. We're sure all of you are aware of that. And as people, we're actually biologically hardwired to remember and enjoy stories. And you can find references to this in research about memory and information retention. But really, the idea goes way back to ancient times when poets wandered the lands and spread stories among people. And the reason these stories are still around today, if you think of stories like the Iliad or the Odyssey, is because people retained stories because they were engaged by the storyteller. So on this slide, we have a picture of Horace. And Horace was one of the great Roman poets and storytellers. So if he applies for a sales position at your company, you should hire him. But unfortunately, the fact of the matter is many of us just aren't great storytellers. And it gets worse than that. If you are selling intangible services, like many of you are, or have complicated delivery models, or as 80% of you said earlier today, you have a unique offering, chances are you're very well versed in the details of what you do, but your prospects will have a hard time following it if that's what you immediately go to. And this is where it's helpful to sell their stories that describe the benefits of working with you before you actually get deep into the details. So on that note, here's a quick story. One of our clients is a multinational services provider competing with some of the giants in the field like your IBMs. And we originally engaged with them to help refine their positioning in the marketplace to differentiate them from those giants who were monopolizing brand awareness. But through our process, part of our process is interviewing the leadership team and the sales team to understand internal perceptions of the company. And when we did that, we learned something very interesting. They could not tell stories. And they were all brilliant people, and they could dive right into the details and explain every process intricacy to the prospect. But they had such difficulty in taking a step back and telling a story that conveyed their overall value. And as a direct result of that lack of ability to tell a story, the brand was not gaining traction in the minds of their prospects, and therefore the brand awareness suffered because people just couldn't go back to their organizations and say, hey, we heard this really great story from a provider we spoke to today. They didn't have that, and they couldn't remember all the details. So how can you arm your team with consistent messages and therefore the foundation for stories to tell? So on the next slide, we have a tool that we call sales battle cards. And sales battle cards are essentially cheat sheets to help everybody use the same messages and build a consistent brand. And they can come in various forms. So what we're showing you here is a deck of 4x6 cards, but we've developed these for multiple clients throughout different mediums. So it can be a deck of cards, it can be an accordion filled out, it could be a customized app. What's really important, though, is that just the right information is in it, and then you can choose the medium of delivery that best suits your organization. But an important note before we move on is that thorough research and insight goes into creating these cards, because if you don't have good informed information on these cards that everyone is using, then that's not really equipping your team to succeed. And that's a topic we address in other webinars, but we'll assume that we've reached the stage where we have informed information. And so now we have the following content, which we can place on the handy cards. So in the next slide, we're just looking a little more about what exactly are sales battle cards, and we'll walk you through some of the basic components that usually make up a sales battle card deck. But it serves three essential purposes: the means to align your messaging and marketplace positioning with other outreach efforts. So once again, this is hammering that consistency point of view where you want your sales teams to communicate the same information that the market is seeing in your advertisements, in your press releases, in your sales materials, at conferences, etc. The second main objective is it's a tool to ensure that your sales force is equipped with to make sure that your company is different from your competition. So oftentimes the stories and messages that can convey your differentiation already exist, but the problem is that they're lost. And they're lost in presentations, in intranets, in emails, in meetings, in the minds of certain people, but not in other people. And so this tool really creates a simple single repository where the most important information and messages can live and people can easily access them. And the third objective is to allow flexibility for each salesperson's experiences, all while keeping the conversation focused on your strengths. So the goal of the sales battle cards is not to create robots out of your sales team, like Breanna mentioned earlier, but rather to encourage them to use their unique approaches in selling while always making sure to bring it back to a familiar base and foundation, which is the messages that are important to your organization. So if we move to the next slide, we just want to show you how we generally find out what's unique about an organization. And then this becomes the foundation for the messages that then appear in the battle cards, which we'll get into right after this. But this is what we call a messaging pyramid. And there are generally three levels of messages that a company can have: the table stakes at the bottom, valued in the middle, and unique up on top. So the table stakes are claims that you have to make in order to play in the space. So we often use the simplified example of the airline industry to help explain what this messaging pyramid is. So for example, the table stakes for an airline industry, one of those attributes would be being safe. So this is a message that needs to be communicated, and while completely necessary, it isn't necessarily different from anything else any other airlines are doing. It's just one of the basic things you need to be an airline. So then once you have those table stake messages, we move up to the valued attributes. And these are the attributes that will get you on the short list. So they're not needed to be in the industry, but they are valued by your customers. And to kind of call in that airline industry again, for an airline, a valued message might be flying to more destinations than the average airline, or having no extra fees. So once again, these are very highly valued by your customers, but you don't necessarily need them to be an airline. But what we want to focus on and what we find is most valuable for our clients is creating messages that are built around the unique attributes. And these are what really close the deal. These are the messages that only your organization can claim. And oftentimes what we find is in mature industries, these unique attributes are often intangible. So once again, if we look at the airline industry, if you're familiar with the airline Southwest, they claim that they are fun. So, you know, a Delta or any other airline can't credibly make this claim. And so while Southwest certainly uses that as their differentiator, and you can see it in their advertisements, you can see it in the way that their flight attendants act on the planes. So an understanding of this pyramid and specifically the pyramid as it relates to your company is essential in building the sales battle cards. So moving on, we can start to look at what are the components within sales battle cards. And so the first one is your elevator pitch. And as we say here, this is how you would succinctly tell someone what your business is and what you do. So think of maybe you're at a conference or you're at a cocktail party or you met a friend of a friend and they ask what you do. This is your one-liner. You know, you don't want to use any jargon. You want it to be understood by all. You want it to be slightly provocative too. You want it to explain what you do, but you want to lead the listener to ask you for more information. So once they ask for more information, we can move to the next slide. And this is your value proposition. So the value proposition is derived from the messaging pyramid, which you saw a few slides ago. And this is essentially the 50,000-foot view of what you do and how you benefit your customers. So the value proposition is something that might live on the home page of your website or in the About Us section, or the overview on your sales materials. But essentially, what is the greatest value your clients receive from working with you? It focuses on the aspects that make you the most unique, and it's what makes you different, what makes you special. On the next slide, we have our key messages. And so typically, we recommend 3 to 5 key messages for our clients. And we like to use this example of if someone threw a basket of ping pong balls at you, how many would you catch? And most people couldn't catch more than 3 to 5. And it's an interesting metaphor because, one, it's fun to think about, but two, our brains work the same way. You can't possibly remember more than 5 messages of a company that you just met at a conference. And so you really want to make sure that you're conveying the right messages, the ones that make you most unique. So these are the core messages. These key messages are the focal points of what you do and what clients can expect from you. And these are helpful in storytelling because your sales team can all tell different stories that are unique to their own experiences, but what they can often do with those stories is tie them back to these key messages, which then brings it back to that home base and builds consistency for your brand. On the next slide, this is showing your key messages, but also what we get into here is proving them, because you can say that if you're the airline, that's fun, and one of your key messages is we are fun. You really need to prove that, and so we call these proof points. And proof points are basically facts, they're testimonials, they're case studies. There are other specific details that can help you support a message. And so these are, if the value proposition was your 50,000-foot view, the key messages were your 20,000-foot view, and the proof points are, you're really zooming in now. So for the airline who says we are fun, some of their proof points might be, well, our pilots tell a joke to the passengers before every flight. Or maybe they have a testimonial of a customer who is really excited and wrote a letter about how much fun her flight was. And I'm sure you all have these kinds of proof points about some of your clients and prospects and how you've been able to serve them. And so it's really helpful to build this repository so that your other sales members who maybe weren't directly involved in that can still reference these stories and really use the value that these proof points provide.
Nick, can I take that? I just want to jump in on this. So a lot of our work is really focused on honing in these 3 to 5 key messages. And Nick just mentioned a really important point. In order to determine what these messages are and how to prove them, you're naturally starting to build a repository of this, this knowledge of the organization. And we have found with a lot of our clients that there's a couple of key people who are, their main sales folks. Sometimes for smaller organizations, it's the CEO. In other cases, it's, a long-tenured salesperson. But they have all these stories and all these great experiences that they've had with this organization in their head. And part of scaling an organization, growing the organization, is to share this institutional knowledge. And we actually have some of our clients that embrace these messages so much that on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, they gather their direct and indirect sales teams, because oftentimes our companies have channel sales folks, and they come together and they go through each of the messages and they share stories and they document them and they create a living repository. So this way, when you bring new people aboard, they don't have to have that same experience of lived through that one client opportunity and that one initiative that was a huge catalyst for for growth and success for one of your clients, but they have the stories there, they have the proof points, they have, some of these repositories actually connect people to specific folks inside their organization. So if you know you're pitching an opportunity you've had success in, but you weren't there for it, but based on the living repository, oftentimes these are on intranets, you can connect with that person and just say, hey, tell me about this. How did this go? And it becomes, this isn't just a communications tool. It's actually a business strategy tool at times for some of our clients, and incredibly valuable. And one other story, we've had a few clients who take their core messages very, very seriously, and they have people in the organizations that interact with the marketplace, be they execs, sales, marketing, their support folks. They have to be certified in understanding the key messages. And literally, it is a, come in, there's a 3-panel, including the CEO sitting there, and says, okay, so if asked a question about what do we do, what do you say? And they're literally graded on it, and if they fail, they have to go back, study harder, and come back and do it again. And they really take this very, very, very seriously for their organization to be consistent and to grow. So just a couple of anecdotes there for you.
Mm-hmm. And those are all very important points, and I do want to call out one of those things that Breanna just mentioned was when organizations are bringing together their sales teams, whether they're direct, indirect, or both, and reviewing the key messages and telling stories around those, because that's valuable, one, for building the proof points, but there's also another valuable outcome that comes out of that. And if we go to the next slide, when you have all these salespeople in a meeting and they're telling these stories, one of the things that you're doing is you're also gaining an understanding of what your client's pain points are. So what we've talked about up until now is how you talk about your organization. But really what a successful sales engine needs to do is kind of put on the client's shoes and think about, well, what are they dealing with? Because chances are they're not out there saying, hey, we need to look for, a SaaS-based model that is, that does X, Y, Z. Their problems are more centric to the business. So if you look at this example we have on the slide, we need to improve our new customer sales and retention. And so they're not necessarily aware of what solution is out there, but by having an understanding of what the most common pain points are for your clients, what you're doing is you're equipping your sales team and your marketing team as well and your executive leadership to really understand what it is that your prospects are dealing with. And then once they have that understanding, they can better pitch their services and their solutions. So this card helps you think like your clients. Moving on to the next one. This is a continuation of knowing your client's pain points, but another point about this is having these pain points outlined, it also enables your organization to bundle the skills and expertise and create scalable solutions. And because oftentimes what you'll find, and we're sure that you've encountered this, is you have a large number of clients who are dealing with the same issues, and chances are you're good at addressing that. But when you have an understanding of what the typical client pain points are, you can bundle solutions around that, and it can help you sell more effectively. On the next slide, we have another component that typically exists in the sales battle cards deck, and this is your core expertise. And this seems like something that you would know, and you do know this, but oftentimes your core expertise can get buried within itself. You often want to focus on some of the details, and so keeping it top of mind and making sure you articulate it consistently, it helps prospects to recognize what you're offering and the value of it and how you're different. And over time, what this does is you'll create a demand for your expertise. So having this card really just helps you from getting lost in the details and making sure that you're sticking to what's core in your organization and that you're communicating that consistently. On the next slide, so this is a continuation of your core expertise. But once again, it seems like sales 101, but there are certain factors that can cloud this information and get you lost in the details. So once again, this card is a very crucial component to have in the sales battle card deck. On the next slide, a card that we typically include for our clients are the company facts. And these are just good to have on hand, especially for initial phone calls or if you need to quickly respond to an email. It allows you to use these quick facts consistently. And generally, what we would include in here are a list of your services, industry expertise, so where you work and how long you've been in those industries. On the next slide, it's a list of your major clients. And so this can also lead you directly into some proof points. So if you know who your major clients are, you can start to speak to some of those stories about them. Any awards or recognitions that you may have, as well as any certifications. Then on the next slide, a very important part about selling, as you're aware, is knowing how to sell against the competition. So we had 20% of you earlier said you're selling against many similar firms. And so we find that this card is, typically it's most helpful for you, but it's also helpful for everyone because there's going to be competition or alternatives out there. But knowing who you're selling against is the critical ingredient to this. And what you want to do is think of the top 3 to 5 competitors that you run into in different RFPs or just out there in conversations. And actually think about, okay, who are the competitors? What is it that they do, and how do you sell against them? So how are your skills and capabilities more valuable than theirs? And having these in quick handy flashcards is really helpful for a sales team on the go. On the next slide, so this is the continuation of it. And so generally what we would do is list this out. So you would have the information for your top 3 to 5 competitors. So to wrap that up, these sales battle cards can really vary based on the specific business and your specific needs. And as I mentioned, they can come in different forms, whether they're actual flashcards or whether it's an app of some sort. But essentially the things that we like to think of putting in these are the crucial messages for the business. So the elevator pitch, the value proposition, and the key messages. And then also knowing how to think like your clients, so the client pain points, and making sure that your core expertise aren't getting lost in the details, and then just having some quick handy facts as well as how you sell against competitors. And so a simple deck like this, like I said earlier, really brings together the valuable messages and the things that you want to keep consistent when you're selling. And it just creates a single, easy-to-use repository for your sales and marketing teams.
Yeah, so, Nick, if I can jump in with just one quick sec, and you can leave this up. We have a nice little box with these cards and an overview document that we can send folks who are on this call or who are listening to this call offline. If you're interested in them, there'll be our email address at the end of this so that you can actually physically hold them, look at them, and oftentimes we've sent these to some folks. And a senior executive story I recall is CEO got these, loved them, went and copied them and handed them to his sales team and said, I want you to fill these out and I want you to submit these back to me by tomorrow. And he was dismayed at the inconsistency of the answers to these cards and consequently called us. So they can be an interesting kind of litmus test for your organization. If you need help with this, it's also, it's just handy to, kind of digest them. And like Nick says, they can be in this card form or they can be in, more electronic, intangible, they can exist in, companies' intranets and things like that. But, we've found more often than not, folks like to carry them around, and they're not big on purpose, and it just, again, those cheat sheets that help keep people on point. So just think about that. If you're interested in seeing them, we'd be more than happy to send you some.
Yeah, and that's actually one of my favorite sales battle card stories, is the CEO asking his team to fill it out. And so certainly I would recommend each of you to do that. And so if you reach out to us afterwards, we can send you these. And it would be an interesting way to validate how you responded to the poll earlier, and see if everyone actually says the same thing, or if everybody does say the different thing. And then if they do, what are some of the different things that they're saying? Because that's always an interesting piece to find out. If we can go to the next slide. There are many ways to use sales battle cards, and they're all not listed here. But some of the top ways that our clients use them are before a sales call. So you can do a quick prep, or you can use them during the call if the prospect asks a specific question. They're really quick and easy to reference. So you can do this on initial calls with a prospect, or even an influencer if you're speaking with an industry analyst. You can use it as a reference guide in written conversations, whether that be emails or if you're putting together a presentation. You can use it to help tell your company's story and values, so to help other people do that rather. So like I mentioned earlier, some of your sales folks are going out there and they're involved in these amazing deals and they have very interesting stories, but they're the ones that have that direct relationship with the stories. And so this tool kind of helps translate that to the rest of the organization and enables the rest of the organization to use that story and benefit from it. You can use these tools in an RFP executive summary. These are definitely useful when training or onboarding new employees. So as Breanna mentioned, one of our clients did a messaging certification program with their employees, and so they've also incorporated that into their new hire program. So when they bring on new hires, they train them in the brand's messaging, and they'll test them, and they'll give them the battle cards for that. And then finally, in your marketing and communications materials. So like we mentioned earlier, you want your sales and marketing and your executive leaders to be saying the same things that the market is seeing in your advertisements and on your website and in your sales materials. And so to use this tool as a way to build consistency across all ways that your brand is being communicated is a very effective use of it. And with that, Breanna will take on over the next slide.
Thanks, Nick. So developing sales battle cards. We have found in our experience that this is an important exercise in objectivity, and what we mean by that is oftentimes, this is a useful instruction for companies to do this themselves. And if that makes the most sense for the organization, we're happy to support the framework for it. More often than not, we have found that strategic positioning and messaging can be more powerful when the research is conducted by a third party. And this isn't just kind of a self-fulfilling comment here, but it's just kind of a practical reality that you're very close to your organization. And sometimes it takes an outsider to see what makes you special. We had a client once that just the COO said, you know what, we do exactly the same thing as all of our other companies, all the other companies we compete with. There's nothing unique. Good luck with your challenge because you're not going to find anything that makes us special. And going back to something that Nick said when he was talking about the messaging pyramid and what was truly unique, when you have industries that are very competitive and everybody in terms of products and services is just parity, those qualities at the top are often intangible, and that's exactly what we found with this organization. What ended up being really differentiating about them and literally helped them win deals was the way that they showed up at sales presentations and just how kind of real people they were. The CEO for this company said, listen, we're in a messy, transaction-oriented business. And guess what? We're going to mess up at some point along the way. The good news is we pretty much know where that's going to happen when data files transfer over, something's going to slip. And here's my business card. Here's my cell phone number. You can call me 24/7 to make sure that, if you have a concern and you're challenged with something and you're not sleeping well at night, call me. And that was a distinguishing characteristic of that organization because it happened at the executive level all the way down through the organization from the standpoint of just being very real. And when you talk to clients, they actually shared with us those stories back. They said, you know what, they showed up, they were very realistic on how hard a business this is and how things are going to get messed up along the way. And you know what, we're going to, and one person said, I literally sleep better at night knowing that I chose them. Whereas other companies showed up and they were kind of beating their chest about everything's going to be perfect and, we've done this many, many times for many, many years. And so the point is, if the organization had done this themselves, we don't know if they would have really honed in on that attribute as something that was very distinguishing for them. There were a few other things, but that was a really important one. Often, in order to discern these 3 to 5 messages in your value proposition, there's a lot of input that goes into the top of a funnel, if you can think about it. It's really a distillation process. And we talk with the internal folks, also clients, prospects, and partners. And when a third party speaks and asks them questions about the organization, oftentimes we can get much more frank and candid answers. Because people are going to be a little bit more hesitant to give constructive criticism or to share thoughts, ideas, and stories if the organization themselves are asking them. And we're also familiar with the challenges of long, complex sales cycles, especially in the outsourcing industry. So it really is thinking through how these messages can be helpful for you over time, and how with those proof points you can develop a nurture campaign where you can help keep honing in and hammering those messages by telling different stories and using different case examples along the way, because oftentimes our clients' sales cycles are 6 months to 2 years in length. So we understand that. This presentation will be available on our website at delfgroup.com. And if you could go to the next slide. My email address is there, and Nick's is nalexander@delfgroup.com. We were remiss in putting Nick on there, but please send any questions that you have to us. There's a few more slides, a little bit more about us, but since we have only a few minutes left, I thought maybe we would answer some questions that have come in, and if that works for everybody, I just want to answer. I see a question that says, can you go more into the difference between an elevator pitch and a value proposition? And that's a great question. The elevator pitch really is a distillation of the value proposition. Oftentimes a value proposition can be a couple of sentences, whereas an elevator pitch should be something really succinct and like Nick said, a bit provocative and something that gets people kind of to tip their head and say, really? Tell me more about that. I can tell you for a company that was in the call center space, they had a value proposition. They supported a lot of companies from a tech support standpoint, and their elevator pitch, when talking to somebody, literally, in an elevator, hey, what do you do? They said, when you call your favorite brands, we answer the phone. And somebody would tip their head and say, well, what do you mean? And they would say, well, do you own a computer? Yeah. Have you ever had tech support? Trouble that you needed to call tech support? Yeah, of course. What kind of computer do you have? Oh, I have a Dell, or I have a Sony. Well, that's us. We answer those phone calls. And people are like, oh, wow, that's interesting. So it's an opportunity to tell a story. It's an opportunity to be a little bit provocative. And, it just keeps it simple. And if there is another mantra that we talk about here with communication and messaging, it's simplicity, consistency, and repetition. So keeping things simple and digestible and easy for people to turn around and tell others is really vital because otherwise it's really hard for that word of mouth if it's very complex and detailed. There were a few more questions that came in too. Somebody asked, what are the typical reasons for embarking on an initiative like this? And I thought that was a really terrific question. And I would say on the whole, there's probably 5 or 6 reasons why companies say, you know what, this could be really valuable for us. And at a high level, some folks are just like, you know what, we're at an inflection point, we want to grow our business. And to grow our company, we need to grow our client base. In order to do that, we need to be clear and have a differentiated brand. And so that's a proactive move that companies are doing. You know, others are, you know, to compete more effectively. Some companies are, you know, challenged with, you know, their margins are shrinking and they're getting into these price wars, and they need to postulate a value proposition that is benefits driven as opposed to cost driven, and they need to elevate the perception of their business. And that's another reason why we are contacted. There's very logical things like mergers and acquisitions when companies come together and they need to reconcile 2 brands or more coming together. We've worked with companies that are roll-ups, and you have multiple organizations, multiple cultures that are, you know, need to be considered in terms of what's the story that this combined organization wants to tell in the marketplace. Sometimes companies are evolving their products and services, and so what once was new to the marketplace is everybody has the same thing now, and they have something new they want to introduce. They have a new way of doing providing their services, or they have you know, acquired a new technology. That's a reason to reconnect. And oftentimes then there's, you know, new leadership aboard. You know, the company has, you know, evolved its team. They've brought in, you know, new people who see the business through a new lens, and they say, you know what, it's time for us to reckon order here and make sure that, you know, what we believe to be our business strategy is echoed in the marketplace. So those can be, you know, very logical reasons why. And, you know, all of this is kind of under that umbrella of, you know, sales, accelerating sales, competing more effectively, growing your business, and, you know, that's why this tool and this approach can be very effective. David, can you go to the next page? So this is a little bit more about us, and just on the last page, you guys can pick this up. And these are just a kind of a cross section of some of our clients. I'll just leave that up as we answer. Nick, I'll throw this to you. Somebody asked, this seems like this is geared for sales only. How can marketing benefit from this too? Want to take that one?
Yeah. Yes, certainly. So that's a great question, and, you know, it is presented in a convenient sales format. Even the name Sales Battle Cards, you know, we we can see how that might be misleading. But the reality is that in order for this to be the most effective for an organization, is that this is designed with both functions in mind, because sales needs to talk to marketing and marketing needs to talk to sales. And when that happens, an organization is both effective in communicating to the marketplace what it stands for, and also generating leads and selling business. And so, you know, this goes back to that mantra that Breanna mentioned. It's all about simplicity, consistency, and repetition. And if you think back to how we described some of the possible uses for sales battle cards, you know, obviously, yes, from a sales point of view, but there's also a crucial marketing role that they play. And so having these sales battle cards is very helpful for writing sales and marketing materials, and, you know, that you can use it in crafting an email campaign or something, and can be used in advertising. So this is a tool that is, you know, very beneficial to both the sales and marketing side. So that's a good question.
Great. And We have just a couple minutes left. I see one more question came in, is the difference between an elevator pitch and a tagline. Again, it's a good question, and we would contend that the tagline is a distilled version of the elevator pitch. So again, it's this distillation process of your core messages really help to create this value proposition, because elements of your key messages should be in your value proposition, and then extracting out of that can be this succinct, provocative elevator pitch. And then even more distilled, it can be just a few words for your tagline, because oftentimes even an elevator pitch is too long to be a tagline. So those can be kind of constructs, and some companies use taglines and others don't. So there isn't a specific rule of thumb for that. And this person, would you mind reposting your email address? Yes, David, can you go back a couple slides just so that people can see? There you go, thanks. And lastly, and literally 3 minutes left, one person asked, I'm a leader in the marketing group and would like to know what is most critical to ensure a project like this is adopted and embraced. Well, I think that's a terrific question to end on, which is, the most successful engagements that we have done is when there is senior executives who are proactive sponsors and advocates of this effort. Having this support enables people from sales and marketing to strategy to, throughout the whole organization to participate. And being engaged is so important, because people who are engaged in this process will more readily adopt it. So when people are engaged and they're aligned, efforts like this can just be tremendous catalysts for growth. So with 2 minutes to spare, David, back over to you in terms of whatever closing statements you want to make. But hopefully that was helpful to everybody. We thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and we look forward to following up with anybody who's interested in talking with us.
Great. Thanks a lot. I want to thank Breanna and Nick very much for their presentation. Thank everybody out there who's listening in. You will be receiving a follow-up email in 2 days with a link to the recorded webinar and contact information of both speakers. So any information you need further, just go to outsourcing.com, and everybody have a great day. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.